Directors, Vicki, could you please do a roll call?
Yes, Donovan.
Here.
Fleetwood.
Here.
Hawkinson.
Here.
Cortez.
Here.
Lilyquist.
Here.
And do we have Davidson? Board member Davidson is absent. It looks like board members Huthman, Lautenbach, Sadhu, and Darwin are absent. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should give them all demerits. No second from a motion. We'll go on to the next item, which is citizen communications. Are there any written communication we don't know about, or is there any member of the public who is here and wishes to be heard?
Vicki, did we get anything? And I've been kind of in and out, but
Yeah, no new communications.
okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to update on service to Camp Horizon. Should we go straight to Shelley, or what should we do?
Yeah, just a quick lead in. What we're hoping to do is provide some examples of what WTA does in implementing mission so that we can all feel connected to some of those great things that are going on out there, and to demonstrate the great things that WTA and the service that is provided. This is one example of that. So appreciate Shelley and I think Andrew, I can't really see, but are there to talk about it. So over to you, Shelley. Thank you.
My bit's pretty quick. Do I need to sit at the table? I
Closer.
can project.
You're closer to
I
the mic.
forget it. So this is directly tied to the new ADA corridor in Birch Bay Blaine, because that put Camp Horizon in the corridor. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Camp Horizon. It's run by the Lions Club. They do it every summer for folks with disabilities. And the amazing thing about Camp Horizon is people do not age out. And so you might have somebody that is 16 with a disability going to camp, and you might have somebody that's 55, and they're all going. They tell us that they've had someone as senior as 85 in one of their camp programs. So we were participating in the adventure camp, which basically means these folks are all ambulatory with various disabilities. And they initially asked if we could help with transport on 3 different days for the 2 different sessions. It ended up one of the locations they were going to that didn't work out, so we did the other 2. So in the end of July, we took 49 people. Most of those were campers. There was some staff on board from their location, which is just off of Alderson, just up the hill from the ski shop, and took them to the Birch Bay State Park. We've never been on that site before, so Andrew and I had to kind of do a little bit of what kind of a 4-point turn are we doing here to get this 40-foot bus turned around, but it was great. And then the second thing we did is we took them from Camp Horizon to Station 49, and I don't know if they were doing the go-karts or the mini golf or everything, go-karts.
Yes.
So great fun was had by all. That one, we weren't able to pull off the road all that much. It's off of Birch Bay Linden Road. So we enlisted the help of our new TSOs to kind of bracket the bus, and with their nice lights going, and they got to feel pretty special to hold up with everything so we could load and offload. I'll leave the fun discussion to Andrew.
Yeah, I think the campers felt pretty special when they were escorted with like a security escort to take them. And rightfully so, they needed, oh yeah, amber lights flashing. You'd think that a bus ride that's a couple miles long, most of the time we have commuters on our bus that are doing it, and it's pretty standard and it's pretty quiet on the bus and people are staring at their cell phones and such. This was an event for these folks at the camp. Boarding the bus was an event. It was exciting. They were walking up the ramp. The energy was static. You could feel it. And then once we started moving on the bus, we had speed bumps that we were going 2.5 miles an hour over, and every bump was a woo! It's a roller coaster that we were on down there, but it was really awesome to see a diverse group of humans that connected and supported to each other too. That age range was really awesome. And then when we came back, we were the headliner at a summer rock concert. As soon as I pulled up in the bus, they were waving and yelling, "Wow, yeah!" So I don't know if they had just had a horrible time at the park and wanted to get back to camp really bad, or if they were just that enthusiastic about the bus. It was really impactful and awesome to be out there. And I know that it was not taken for granted too. I think everybody felt supported and connected to their community.
And so technically what we did was something similar like we used to do for the Adult Bay Health when we were taking folks to Linden, is that a lot of those folks were our regular paratransit riders. So they could have, given the new corridor, individually booked rides for some of this transportation. And so for efficiency and just for fun, we got everybody together and put them on a big truck. So it was quite fun, and we're going to do it again in a couple weeks, the 8th and the 10th in August, and do the same 2 trips. Camp Horizon to the state park, and then Camp Horizon to Station 49. So.
Oh, I mentioned I was really sure that it was the go-karts.
Yeah.
The reason being is that one of the campers had on their driving gloves.
Okay.
And were letting me know that they were absolutely going to win the race. I followed up to see how their race went, and they very confidently said, "Oh yeah, it's good."
Okay. Thanks for letting us know.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. No questions for Andrew or Shelley?
I have a question. This is the old Air Force Base?
Yes. Yeah.
When did the Air Force Base end up? That's interesting to me. I didn't realize there was an Air Force Base in Whatcom County. Huh.
Yeah, they're still using some of the buildings, so they didn't get rid of them.
Oh, darn.
They just repurposed them for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. We'll now go on to the rest of the agenda. First item is a board action consideration of a contract for grant writing services. Maureen.
Thank you very much. As you may know, if you read the agenda item, we've been handling our grant writing for forever, actually, by assembling a small competitive grants team made up of people from 4 different departments. And this method has worked fairly well for us over the years, and probably could continue to work if we were to continue to seek the same types of grants for the same types of things. But with this program, and actually I should introduce Heather Good, who's one of the folks from Haley Aldrich, which is the firm that we're seeking to contract with. There are 3 things really that we're looking for. The first is research and strategic alignment. And one thing to note there is that we probably get 4 different lists from 4 different sources every month, with long lists of links of grants to investigate and research. And some of these are things that we may not be eligible for now, we might not be ready for now, but they may make a lot of sense in terms of aligning strategically with projects that we have coming up. So it would be very helpful for us to have someone outside with a look at sort of our overall grant strategy. That is one. Another is following policy developments. And I'll just use environmental justice, or, and I have to look at my list even to say it correctly, vulnerable populations and overburdened communities. This is the way the federal government and the state government are trying to capture the benefits that go to vulnerable populations through their grant programs. And you know, when these and other things like them come out, there really is a lot of shifting and changing in terms of the ways you're going to be asked to quantify the benefits of your projects. And so to have someone focused on those changes and developments will be really useful. And third is just size and complexity. some of the projects that we have coming up will be larger and more complex than the projects we have sought grant funding for before. And so it would be really useful to have a team of experts who have done, much larger and more complex grants. Under the fiscal impact, you'll see that we're looking for no more than $100,000 per year. I suspect there could be quite a range year to year because, of course, we will engage Haley and Aldrich only when we have grant programs that we think we could be successful in getting, and when we have a project that's appropriate for it.
So given that up to 100,000, how did you even pick that number as the upper limit?
Well, I would say for one thing, we considered hiring someone in-house. Most agencies our size have someone who is dedicated to grant funding. So that's sort of roughly what we would imagine like a full-time equivalent would be. And then we also did have, sort of a scenario if we had, let's say, 4 grants of X level of complexity and we were to look at hourly rates to fit within that. I think having more than 4, complex big grants per year is unlikely at this time.
Board members, Scott?
So it's by the hour?
It is by the hour, yes. Yeah.
There are different rates for different.
Different rates for different.
Great.
Any questions for Maureen or for Heather? Or for Heather?
If I could just say this is one of the efforts to try to build capacity to achieve our strategic initiatives. And so we decided we would do this by contract first to see how it works. And before we considered an in-house, as Maureen said, many have in-house, but we thought we'd do this first and see how this works. And as the complexities of these continue to grow on the grants, particularly as they start crossing between like US DOT and US Department of Energy and so forth, the complexity is increasing. So these folks can help us wage through that. So thank you.
Board members?
I'll move we approve this contract.
Second.
We have a motion before us to authorize general manager to execute a 3-year contract with Haley and Aldrich for grant research and writing services. Maximum of $100,000 per year, $300,000 over the year, but that's the actual amount to be determined by services delivered. Any further discussion? Heather, you want to say anything?
Say that I'm happy for the opportunity
Right.
and look forward to.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye, raising your hand so I can see you online.
Aye.
I think that's 5, is it 6-0? 6-0. Thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item. Next item is a consent agenda consisting of the routine expenditures for June and minutes for June.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Motion forced to approve the consent agenda. I would note the expenditures were twice usual because it includes 2 electric buses. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raise your hand so I can see you online.
Aye.
Aye.
6-0, passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Reports to the board. We have 2 of them. First, Mary, you are up with the Lindenhoff evaluation results. Les, do you want to say anything first or go straight to Mary?
I'll just thank Mary for and Tim and the team for pulling this together. It's really enlightening and sets the groundwork for the microtransit study going forward about looking at if we can scope and scale this similar service into the future. So thanks to Mary for her hard work pulling this together. Over to you, Mary.
Take it away.
Okay. Oh, good. It's working. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So, as a reminder, back in probably 2018, 2019, the board of directors, some of you who are sitting at the table and others formerly, pushed staff to try something new, especially in the small cities. And so that led us to applying for an FTA Integrated Mobility Innovation, IMI, Mobility on Demand Sandbox Grant. Yes, it's a lot of acronyms. So we applied for that in kind of like late spring 2019 and then found out on March 16th, 2020 that we were awarded, and Maureen and I were like, hey, can we high five? Is that allowed? Like, what do we do? So that was an incredibly exciting and stressful time, but that's how it landed. And so as part of this, the grant requirement, since it's considered kind of a research innovative grant, we have to supply a final report to the FTA, which I have submitted, and do knowledge sharing. So I've been at a few conferences so far this year across the states, sharing this information out, and I always start it by thanking the board of directors and you're pushing us to think outside the bus. So I know it's so bad, but most people only hear it once, so at least that's good. And so most of what is in this report, or I should say all of what's in this report in this presentation is in the final report. I've heard it takes about 6 months for the FTA to finalize the report. So once that is kind of reviewed and finalized by the FTA, I'll be sure to send that link out to all of you. So when we wrote this grant, our objectives were really just to see, does on-demand work in our small cities, and how well does it work to do this entirely in-house? At that time, most of our peers across the state and across the nation were partnering with Uber or Lyft to do this and kind of outsourcing the entire thing. And we had heard of a number of complexities then that arose with that. And so we said, well, let's look at what that might look like to do it in-house. And then we also set a goal of the per trip cost to be equal to, or ideally less than, that of a paratransit trip. So this is just kind of the high level statistics from the pilot period, which, as you can see on there, is June 13th, 2021 is when the project launched. And then the kind of study period ended December 31st, 2022. So I'll just look at that quickly. So yeah, about 983 unique passengers, which I thought was actually like a pretty good number. The city of Linden itself has about 15,000 residents, and so the 983 seemed like a fairly good number for unique passengers. And then 17,618 total boardings. Yeah.
That's 6% of our population.
Thank you. There you go. I know.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah, that's really good. And I know. Well, I know. I was going to say I think one of them is me too. I shouldn't say I think. I know one of them is me too. So it's the residents as well as visitors. Okay, so then if we dive a little bit deeper into who was riding, we have the unique passengers and then kind of the trip categories. And what I did is I basically took all of the clients or passengers and divided them into 4 trip buckets. So people who only took 1 trip ever, people who took 2 to 9 trips, 10 to 24 trips, and then 25 or more trips within that year and a half study
Technical
period.
question.
Oh yeah.
Is a trip to boarding?
It's 1. So a trip is stepping on the van, riding to your destination, and then your return trip would count as another one.
Okay.
So yeah, so 216 people only ever rode it once. So we took them there and they found another way home or whatnot. I know, or they're still waiting. We don't know. And then 495 took between 2 and 9 trips. And then I'm not going to read all of the numbers to you, but basically, so 22% of the total passengers, that's the 216, took 1% of the total trips, while 15% of the total passengers, so 147 people, took 78% of the total trips. So, over half of the people, only took between like 1 to 9 trips, but we did have 42 riders that took over 100 trips each, and our super rider, the highest number of trips made by one person was 854.
That's utilizing a service.
Yeah, exactly. And then if we look at the, each month and the total number of trips and the unique clients, as you can see, the number of trips per month did, starts a little lower, of course, because it's a brand new service and it launched mid-month. Yeah, and it was, yeah, exactly. And we still had COVID protocols during June as well. And then, so kind of, if we look at more towards like September, October, November, December, we averaged around 160 unique passengers for each of those months. Okay, and then this awesome heat map made by Michael Harpel over here shows the pickups. We also have one for the drop-offs. I did not include it in this. It looks very, very similar. So the grocery store Safeway was by far the number one origin and destination, because oftentimes those two are correlated. You can also see, you know, kind of some of those hot spots in the downtown area over near the high school, and then the other spots are, you know, kind of in the neighborhood areas. We do have kind of this area down here, Hannigan and Poole intersection, where there's that little commercial area there that we do have a few riders that that do take the hop down to that area.
What's the one on the end of Birch Bay Leonard Road?
It's Birch Bay, Linden. There's another kind of cluster of housing.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that-
Oh, that's
in that
included
area.
in the service.
Yeah. Okay, so another question that we often get is, you know, how many of your trips are shared? And so with the software that we have grouped trips and shared trips. So a grouped trip is when two people who did not book together are in the van at the same time. A shared trip is when two people that did book together are in the van at the same time, plus the grouped trips. So really the grouped trip, so this kind of lighter color gray here is the one that we're, I'd say, more interested in and hope to increase. And so in June, we did have the one passenger limit, unless you were, you know, with a family member. And so that's why I started at 0. And it's, let's see.
So Mary, the
Oh,
gray
yeah.
line in a certain sense is efficiency. So
Exactly,
we're lucky to
yep.
be able to do more than one customer at a time.
Yep, exactly.
Unrelated customers.
Unrelated,
Correct,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we have, and so for the group trips, we have a peak of 19% for that one. And then the percentage of the shared trips has a peak of 32%. So yeah, so that is one that we would hope to increase. All right, and then another question that we get to is, you know, how does a Linden Hop, does it connect to fixed route transit? And so we looked at the origins and destinations at the Linden station, and as you can see by the graph, it is fairly low. So it started, you know, in June at 1% of the trips, and then really the peak was only at 6% in January of 2022. So really, what this tells me is a lot of people really aren't using the hop to connect the fixed route. They're using it for their trips within town to get to the grocery store or work or the doctor or their friends or whatnot. All right, so we also look at the booking method. And for our system, you can call a CSR on the phone. You can book a trip on your computer on our website, or you can use your cell phone, use an app. And so with the way that our data is, we can't differentiate between the web and the app. So those kind of are clumped together, but we know if the phone means a CSR. So again, this is another one too that we would hope that the web and the app would be higher and the phone would be lower. And for that, you know, it just means that would mean fewer people calling the CSRs and using the CSR time to book their trip when it is something that's for most people they could do on their own.
You have an age demographic of your rider, because that would indicate you have a bunch of old people.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we, unfortunately, when we did our survey, I didn't ask ages, but we do, we will talk in just a minute about the trips that transferred from paratransit to the hop. And so one thing that we theorize is that because paratransit riders are used to calling the CSR and booking the trip through them, they're doing what's comfortable and familiar to them and not changing. And it's a new software to learn. And so not everybody feels comfortable with that. And I think especially at the beginning, there were some, you know, with all new technology, some kind of hurdles that we had to get over and little things to fix. And some people maybe just said, I'm not going to bother with it. I'd rather call a CSR. But yeah, that is one thing that we've theorized is the age of the riders may influence what booking method they use. Okay, so we have a goal of to pick somebody up within 15 minutes of their requested time. So if I request a trip at, say 8:40, our goal is to the goal will be that I be picked up by 8:55. And so on average, as you can see, we are far exceeding that goal, which is great. And of course, there are certainly times, and we hear about it, when we're not meeting that goal, that we're outside that 15-minute pickup window. However, for the most part, we are picking people up within 8 minutes and 21 seconds. So yeah, faster than you can get your kids out the door, exactly. So that's something that's pretty exciting. Okay, so I mentioned earlier the Linden to Linden paratransit trips. So what this data is just the trips within the city of Linden. This does not include the hop trips or paratransit trips at the Hannigan and Pole intersection. This is just the Linden to Linden trips. And so, okay, sorry, let me read my notes here because there's some statistics I don't want to get wrong. Okay, so there is a clear reduction in the Linden to Linden trips that are happening. So the Linden Hop started on June 13th, 2021. And even after the major drop in trips with COVID, the number of trips did continue to fall through 2021. And system-wide, the paratransit trips are at 71% of the 2019 numbers. Linden to Linden, they're at 32% of the 2019 numbers. And in 2019, the Linden to Linden trips were 1.43% of the total paratransit trips system-wide. And in 2022, there were 0.64% of the system-wide numbers. So what's that saying is if in 2022 the Linden trips were also at 1.43, we would have had an additional 1,230 more trips on paratransit. And also, spoiler, paratransit is more expensive than the hop, so that there is a cost savings there.
Can you say how much more expensive?
I sure can. I have a graph for you.
Okay.
Yes, yep, I will tell you that exact number in just a minute. Okay, so we did a passenger survey, both to learn what the passengers think about the service and because it's required by the FTA. And we did this in May, and we had paper surveys that were available on the vans. And we also had a link to an online survey through the web and the app. And a total of 57 people completed the survey, 42 online and 15 on paper. And for the online survey, there was a question that said, have you already taken this Linden Hop survey? And if people said yes, then they were just kind of kicked to the end of the survey saying thank you, so that we didn't have that redundancy. And in May 2023, 163 unique passengers rode the Linden Hop. And so those the people that took the survey represent 31% of those riders. So one thing that we asked was, where are you going? What's your trip purpose? And thankfully, what people told us aligns with the data that we collected, that shopping is the #1 destination. So as you can see, shopping, 33% of the trips were for shopping, followed, closely by work or volunteering, and then lower numbers for medical, school, visiting friends and family, and others. So we also asked, if you weren't riding the Linden Hop, how would you have made this trip? And most of the people did reply by saying, or I should say, most of the people wouldn't have been able to make the trip on their own. So they wouldn't have been able to drive themselves. So this is providing a service for people who are unable to drive or choose not to drive and rely on others to get to where they need to go. So, 35% would have asked somebody else for a ride, 20% would have stayed home. That it goes down from there of people that would have walked or biked or ridden a fixed route bus or a paratransit bus, and then only 5% said they would have actually driven themselves. And that other, I think, was Uber. I don't know why I didn't think to add that one in as a choice, but
that 6% would have ridden paratransit with the numbers, then would that quantity kind of get us to parity with the, to the 1.4 or whatever percentage that's paratransit for the rest of it?
That is a great question, and I didn't crunch those numbers, and 6%. So we have about, on average, 60 people that ride the Linden Hop per day. So yeah, so 4 times, yeah, it may, yeah, if they were all riding every day, but excuse me, I'll take a drink real quick. There is also, I think, the question of, for some paratransit riders that may not want to fill out a paper survey or an online survey. So I think if we wanted to, if we wanted more information, or were to do this again, maybe we would be on board doing surveys to ask people. Okay, probably need to pick it up a little bit. All right, so boardings per hour. So that's, I have that kind of that blue box there. So as you can see, the boardings per hour are the same in 2022 for paratransit and the HOP at 2.4. But then really the one that everyone's interested in is the costs. So if we look at the costs for the HOP, like I mentioned at the beginning, we did set a goal of the cost per passenger ride to be equal to or less than the paratransit trip, and we met that goal. So the HOP was $63.30 for a passenger ride, and the paratransit is $86.95.
Just send that out though.
What was that?
Will you send the survey out for this?
Yeah, I'll send the whole presentation out for sure. Any questions about that? All right, so okay, sorry. All right, so when we look at resourcing all of our services and the success of the Linden Hop and the requests from other communities that almost immediately came in of saying, hey, we want this in Ferndale, we want this in Blaine, Birch Bay, we want this, in Bellingham, everywhere. One thing that we as staff are looking at is, what is the appropriate level of service for a given community, and should that be fixed route and HOP? Should that be fixed route and or HOP, or what does that resource allocation look like? And so what I did is I looked at the service to Linden, and in Linden, I should say, compared to the service to Ferndale, just because that is the most comparable sized city. And so Route 26, so that does include the entire route from Bellingham all the way to Linden. So you can see the revenue hours for that, the boardings, and then the estimated cost, both for Route 26, which serves Linden, and the Linden Hop. So total revenue hours is 12,662 for the total boardings of 69,327 and an estimated cost of 2.2 million, compared to the city of Ferndale at Route 27, I should say, that serves the city of Ferndale at, well, I don't need to read all my numbers, you can see that there. But basically, why this is important is as staff is looking at making a recommendation to the board, and that's what this next step is, to of how to best serve the city of Linden, that will also likely be applied to other communities. So like I mentioned, we already have a lot of requests for the Linden Hop. Can we give it to everybody that requests it? Can we give everybody fixed route and the Hop that requests it? That's what we're looking at, and that's what we will be back to the board of directors in probably a month or two with a recommendation for the overall service within Linden, and then steps going forward to serve the other smaller communities. Any questions?
Thank you. That was a great presentation. Board members, and could you go ahead and stop sharing the screen so I
Yep.
can see board members?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. That's really cool. So was this initially funded with some sort of grant, and now it's through our regular revenues? And that gets to the issue of how we would scale it up to someplace like Ferndale.
Yes, so it was initially, oh, sorry. Yes, it was initially covered through an FTA grant, and that provided funding for about a year and a half of operating services. It provided funding, or 80% of this. So the 2 vans that we bought, the software and all of that. But really, to truly know if a public transportation service works, it really should be on the streets for at least 2 years. So last year, the board of directors approved funding for the Linden Hop for this entire year. So we could really study it and look at the numbers and find out if it's successful.
Yeah, I think some of the most impressive numbers there are people saying they wouldn't have gone to where they're going, or they would have asked somebody for a ride. So I think yeah, like most of these people wouldn't have been using transit without this option.
If I could, one of the next steps is we'll be coming back to the board with a public hearing, because this will be shifting from a pilot to potentially a full-time service. So we need to do a public hearing on that part. And then that'll time with the budget to fund it for into the future.
So I have a question. Mary, is this program a success, and what numbers do you point to decide that? And how much more can it grow, and what numbers do you point to look for growth?
That's a great question, and I don't think I'm the person who's allowed to say if it's successful or not. I think that I will say that
Please,
we met the objectives.
Please give your opinion, Mary.
Oh, oh boy. Okay, so
You can do it.
I know. So we met the objectives that we wrote in the grant and in the reports, and I think that whenever we as an agency are connecting people to opportunity, that is a success. It is, as you saw, an expensive service to provide. It is curb to curb, we call it. So, you know, it's similar to paratransit, but anybody can ride it. So it does cost less than paratransit. It costs a lot more than fixed route. But yes, of course, people love it, and I would say that's successful. It's increases people's support of public transportation, which I think is a great thing. How can it be replicated in other areas? That's something that we have a small group that is looking at that to find out. Like I said, what is the appropriate level of service in a given area? And one thing that Becky, the other transit planner, often says is like, how much are we willing to pay to move a person a mile, or to move a person a certain distance? And I think that's something that we as staff and the board are going to have to decide, because like I said, we've almost the second this launched, we got requests from, hey, can you give this to me? Can I have this? This sounds great.
Well, let me ask it this way. If there were more ridership, would we achieve economies of scale and bring down the cost per unit of service, or would we just have to have more vans? Would cost continue to scale almost the same rate as ridership, or if there's greater ridership, would it bring costs down?
So, okay, I'm going to answer this, and then I'll also make sure that Erin from finance is correct. So the cost, like, we have 2 vans on the road for most of the time, so we're paying the hourly rate for that. So that cost wouldn't increase if we had more riders. However, when we have more riders and it becomes more popular, our response time is worsens, and then we start getting requests for more vans, which would increase the cost. So at this time, for most hours of the day, we do have capacity for more riders. So yes, we could decrease the cost per ride, but the overall cost to provide the service would remain the same if we have the same number of vans and run the system the same way that we are right now. When it becomes too popular, that's when people start saying like, "Oh, this isn't reliable. I can't use this," and so then ridership may decrease some.
Well, let me ask it this way: how much would ridership have to grow before, at peak times, we would look to adding a third van? Are we anywhere near close to that next step?
The only time that we're close to that right now is at about like the 2 to 4 o'clock hour, which we already do have 2 vans at that time. But it's not, it isn't at a point right now where I would recommend adding another van. It's more like people are like, hey, I have to wait 20 minutes for my ride. And so it's just a little bit less convenient than people maybe would hope that it would be right now. But that's really the only time that we're kind of hitting that peak.
Other board members, Scott?
Oh, if I
Or
could
Les?
just follow up on that real quick, is one of the variables that's in this too is the interplay with fixed route is, so we're looking at how do you deploy your resources and allocate your resources best. So it does this, if you're moving around Linden, using the Linden hop, does that mean we can reduce fixed route to more of a Bellingham to Linden and maybe a little bit into Linden, which then changes kind of the cost structure because you're saving money off the fixed route or at least having a better service. So there's some of these other variables that we're looking at as well that will come forward with this overall microtransit study.
Scott?
He stole my thunder. I was gonna say the same thing.
Okay.
Sorry, Scott. You would have said it much more eloquently, I'm sure.
Ally?
I have a question. Most of my questions got answered already. But I'm wondering when people call in, if we suggest like less popular times to them or kind of educate them about the off-peak times to let them know, like if you had a ride at this time instead of this time, the wait would be less, or do we know if that's happening?
I can probably answer that. I think initially we did, so I just like, they have a graph for what's the best time to go to Disneyland, with the peak times. I think that Andrew could probably create something that would be helpful. And the other thing is one of the things for this pilot was also evaluating the vehicle. Is it the right vehicle size? Is it, it might be that a different vehicle would allow us to have still the same flexibility, but have more riders. There's some components here.
And my second question is not a question, but just, I want some.
Of course. I hear you.
Any further discussion? So I'm going to want to think more about the cost per service, possible economies, next steps. I mean, I think theoretically, philosophically, we'd love to keep providing this and more. It really is about what kind of efficiencies can be achieved and then how it maybe saves costs in other areas or adds to the whole system, interactively rather than in isolation. Any further discussion? Otherwise, Mary, thank you very much for that presentation. We have one further presentation. This one, Michael Harkle will talk about service evaluation standards. Again, Les, do you want to tee this up or go straight to Michael?
Just tee it up. One, there's a lot of information in this, and so we may need to get through part of it and then pick it back up maybe in August, which would dovetail well with the offsite and the discussion there. But the other thing, more importantly, is I just want to thank Michael and Tim. This is really cutting edge things. There's not much of this kind of thinking going on in the entire state on this. And so the questions of how do you evaluate how to provide equity and environments and those kinds of things. What are the metrics that look like? How do we judge how we're doing? Isn't really being done anywhere else, and they're really leading the effort on this. And their good thinking is setting a standard. So this will evolve as we continue to go, but I really appreciate them putting a lot of brain power into pulling this together. So with that, I'll shut up and turn it over to Michael.
Great, thank you, Les. So I'll try to get through this here. As introduced, Michael Harpel, transit planner at WTA. I'm here to give an update on our evaluation standards. So with the adoption of WTA's long-range transit plan, WTA 2040, it kind of called for a sort of paradigm shift to leading with equity. In the past, WTA has predominantly evaluated its services based off of different efficiency performance metrics such as boardings per hour, on-time performance. While those metrics will continue to be extremely important in our evaluation, we wanted to start to emphasize the importance of equity and making sure that we're providing reliable services to the different opportunities and essential services throughout our community. So with this planning staff has taken the opportunity to reevaluate our evaluation standards, and yeah, we're going to take what I'm going to present today and hopefully generate a way to replace the evaluation reports that you currently get at the end of the year with a more digestible digital, something that can be shared with our community and emphasizes how we're serving different population groups throughout our community. So just for starters, we group the evaluation standards into 3 different categories to address different questions that highlight how our transit service is performing throughout the community. So we have our service standards, answering questions such as our WTA transit services connecting the community members, especially priority populations, to the places they need to be at the time they need to be there. Performance standards, how efficiently our WTA transit services operating, and how often our transit service is utilized, and are they reliable? And then design standards, is WTA system and associated infrastructure accessible to all and designed in a way that prioritizes equity and efficiency? So that's definitely highlighting the importance of the American with Disabilities Act, all of the infrastructure things that come along with that. So these standards will help us identify gaps, transit service constraints, route and system level challenges, and potential opportunities for improvement. However, they're not meant to, say a route is passing or failing. It's just an opportunity for us to identify these issues and dig a little bit deeper, right? If we identify that struggling with, certain issues, are there solutions that we can implement to improve that, whether it be design focused, whether it be a scheduling thing, so on. So before I dive into the different standards, as you'll notice throughout, the standards are broken down by typology. So WTA 2040 identified 4 different typologies: our frequent routes, the local urban, connecting between destinations within our community, essentially in Bellingham, the small city rural, and then the regional routes. So jumping in here, throughout some of this presentation, you'll see on the right-hand side, you're going to have the different targets organized by our different typologies. So first being frequency, route frequency, or the rate at which the bus is going to arrive at your bus stop, has a significant impact on reliability of the transit service. Providing more frequent service can reduce layover time and improve the round trip experience and overall usability. It also helps a lot with transfers as well. And then service span. So just important to consider when we have different areas of our communities that rely on different hours of operation. Making sure that we can get service employees to, restaurant early in the morning or late at night, whenever their shifts might be. And yeah, extending those hours can have a significant impact on equity. So the priority populations, which you probably remember from our WTA 2040 presentations, to begin to assess the level at which we're serving these populations, we map the distribution of these populations throughout our community, so our service area, or essentially the county, and set targets for each one. So minority population target would be 22% of the total population, low income target being 16%, and zero vehicle households being 6%. And as you can tell, they are organized in different geographies, and that's the way that the data is collected by the census. So we then compared those proportions and those targets to the market area of each individual route, and created a population or priority population index. So the route would receive 1 point for each of the 3 priority population targets that it exceeded. On the right-hand side, we have 232, a prime example of one of our very high equity serving routes. meeting each one of the population groups targets. So just have those over there. Yeah, so we did this for each individual route, so a lot of data coming through. And once we evaluated all of the routes, we found that 10 of those routes received an index score of 3, 15 received an index score of 2, and 3 routes received an index score of 1 or 0. So only 3 of the routes were actually below our overall target of reaching 2. So what this means for us, on the right-hand side, you can see how we're actually serving the priority population. So sitting around 50% of the minority population is served within a quarter mile of WTA bus stops. Low-income population at 58%, and then zero vehicle, a lot of that being located central to downtown Bellingham at 64%.
Michael, what does MA stand for?
Yes, thank you. So we have the WTA service area on the left, and then the WTA system market area is that quarter mile walking distance around each of the bus stops. Thank you, Les, very much. So just did the same evaluation for the system as a whole. So this is a quarter mile around every single bus stop that WTA serves. And on the right-hand side, you can see exceeding all those targets.
Quick interjection
Yeah.
here. This is GIS Esri system. I think you can share these publicly on the web. Will we be doing that?
That is the goal. So the story map format is
Yes.
one that I'm very familiar with, and one that I would like to utilize to, give this to the public in a way that's fun, interactive. All these can, click, go in deeper, and yeah, so
Great.
hopefully.
I think one of the cool things that Michael's doing with this and Sean is that it helps us identify by routes where we have to think differently and how we're doing and how we can maintain and identify the constraints and restraints and gaps and things. And this gives us a tool to be able to track those at each route level. So this will be super helpful as we're trying to allocate resources in the best manner. So it's a great tool, and I appreciate it, Michael.
I have a question, Michael. So the map we see right now, that's the current system.
Yep.
And in a certain sense, you could give it a rating numerically, right? Show what the numbers are with the current configuration. Presumably, you could run this as a modeling program as well. We could add or subtract a route, recalculate those numbers, and see if we have an equity increase or an equity decrease. Have you done any of that yet, and do you hope to do that?
Yeah, so we do that for our service changes. So whether it be realignments or consideration of new routes. So a lot of that was done in scenario planning for WTA 2040. Yeah, utilizing that to create these new buffers to see, and when we do our service changes, will this have a significant impact on our low income minority and zero vehicle households, or negative or positive, right? So we can see exactly how those population estimates change with different bus stops and different bus routes.
I think it's also interesting because you could drive the numbers up in 2 ways. One, WTA could move its services to try to grab the populations that are a priority, and or the city and the county could drive development to the system that already exists.
So the next standard is the access to opportunity. So another one that's extremely important, making sure that we're getting people to the places that they need to be. So to start doing this, mapped out the distribution of employment density throughout the county, and then went together and inventoried all the essential services generally used in these types of analysis, including childcare, colleges, grocery stores, medical facilities, senior centers, social services, elementary and high schools, and so on. And like with the priority populations, we created an index. So a route would receive a point for each of the destination types that it served. And if the employment density was greater than 3,000 jobs per square mile. And so it's starting off with Route 533, just as a couple examples. You know, it serves a childcare facility, grocery store, medical facility, and a school and shopping center. But overall score is 5, so it would not get that rating. So we would look to see, you know, is there something that we can do to maybe affect that? And then 331, another one of our goal lines. You know, serving each type of the identified facilities and having an employment density nearly 2 times or more than 2 times the target. So again, just looking at this as the system as a whole. Again, on the right, we have the system market area. So that's within a 1/4 mile of every bus stop compared to our county. You know, we have 23 routes that received an index score of 6 or higher and 5 routes that were lower than that. And yeah, these on the right-hand side, you'll see, you know, what percentage of those facilities that have been identified are being served by transit services. And honestly, I think it's quite impressive. Seem to be, whether or not, you know, that's a 2-seat ride for some community members or 1-seat ride for others. Yeah, it's good coverage. But there are certainly some gaps that we can begin to encounter and address. So we've made it to the performance standards. I know we're running low on time. Would we want to save this for the next time, or should I just blast through it?
How much is there to go? I'd rather we not blast through important material.
Yeah.
Les, do you have any?
I would recommend that we hold and continue this at the offsite, because this information dovetails well as we're starting to talk about the transformational things that we're doing and how there'll be trade-offs and so forth. And so really understanding how this works and how this will help us make those trade-offs as we're allocating resources will be super helpful. So I don't want to short circuit it or short shift it. And the work that they've done is really helpful to having those discussions. So a very long-winded way of saying I'd recommend waiting.
Michael, can you quickly show us what you're not going to show us?
Yeah. All right.
And then we'll open up the floor for the stuff you actually covered. As supposed to skip through.
Yeah, sweet. So, so the performance standards, again, this is going into the efficiency of what we're doing. So, yeah, just things that we've seen in the past, boardings per revenue hour, all of our new targets, averages from 2022, and the number of routes not hitting those targets, cost per boarding. So that's something that we'll discuss that's a little bit new, similar to how far or how much we want to pay. Passengers per revenue mile, cost per passenger mile, on-time performance, all of our new targets, and then a little bit on design standards, but that's just a little cap on what we're going to be looking at when we're starting new services.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Board members, any questions on what Michael covered a little bit earlier?
Yeah, of course.
Board members? So I would like, Michael, for you to provide us a link to this story map, because I would like to digest it. I think it'd be good if the board had some time to digest it before our next meeting.
Yep.
Anything else? I want to echo what Les said. These are really good ways of looking at what we're doing. It'd be nice to know that every agency is trying to look at it and find ways of looking at it. Anything
Although
else?
if
Yeah.
you're familiar with like leading indicators versus lagging indicators, the first section was all leading indicators. This is what we want to do, and then the lagging indicators show like how well we're doing it. So the performance standards about boardings per hour and something like that will kind of puts a nice crossover between the 2 types of standards.
Interesting way of looking at it, Josh. Yeah. Leading and lagging. Board members. So Les, what is our next meeting and what's going to be on the agenda for that?
Yeah, so we're no meeting on the 3rd, but on the 17th of August, is the offsite at BIAW, right in the industrial park, Iron Gate. And what will be the first part will be the first about 2.5 hours will be this strategic discussion on things like this, on the transformation of the service, what those transformational items we've been talking about, how those implement the change we're looking for. So this presentation that Michael had is great, tying into that. So we'll talk about that to make sure that our value proposition to the community is being answered. What do each of these things bring value? So we're able to answer the question of if somebody's paying, or everybody who pays 0.6 of a cent of sales tax, where is that going and how is that being used? And then the last hour will be the business aspect of things. Did I get that right, Scott? We flipped it, right?
That's right.
That was a great suggestion. So it'll be at from 8 to 11:30 on the 17th.
Okay, everyone, hope to see you there. We will pick up where we left off with Michael's presentation and go further and deeper in other matters. Any further business before the WTA Board of Directors? Michael?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to share that link with all of you. And I just asked if you could take a look at it with a critical eye, and feel free to come to the next session with questions. And yeah, we'll be able to scroll through that part that I went through, talk about anything that showed up in your analysis or your evaluation, and then we'll go into the performance standards.
Michael, you shared that with any of your local colleagues? I'm thinking the people at WCOG and transportation planners at the cities.
So most of it's been presented internally at this point, but there's definitely room to share that. I wanted to bring it to this team first.
Because our cities all have transportation planning teams.
Yeah.
I think they would bring an expert eye to it.
Yeah.
I think that was Tim's point here, though, is to give you guys a chance to see it and see if there were any adjustments to the standards that you guys wanted to make and get that feedback before it went too broad. Okay.
Yeah, Josh is absolutely right. So make sure that we're good, and then recognize that this is a living document. As things move forward, it can evolve. But then I know Tim's talked to Joel at City of Bellingham, for example, and we'll be sharing this with through the land use process too, to make sure that we can use this information, as you said, Michael, about land use decisions on driving development to those service areas too.
Anything else for the WTA Board of Directors? Seeing none, it is just after 9 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. See you on August 17th.